The morning light filtered through the tall windows of a Parisian apartment on Rue de Turenne, casting long shadows across the hardwood floor. It was May 20th, 2009, and the city was awakening to what would become one of its most haunting mysteries. Inside apartment number 14, silence had replaced what should have been the excited preparations for a 29th birthday celebration just 2 days away. Instead, Lucy Gordon, the ethereal British actress who had graced screens alongside John Cusack and danced through the web of Spider-Man's New York, hung lifeless in her own home, a silk scarf around her neck, her cornflower blue eyes forever closed. The discovery sent shockwaves through an industry that had barely begun to recognize her luminous talent. Here was a woman who had embodied Jane Birkin with such haunting authenticity in Gainsbourg via héroïque that critics called her performance eerily prophetic. The same delicate beauty that had captured hearts on screen now lay shattered in a Parisian apartment, leaving behind only 2 handwritten letters, one for family, one for her French boyfriend, and a world struggling to understand how such radiant promise could end in such devastating darkness. But what drove this rising star to such a final, irreversible decision? Was it the crushing weight of an industry that devours its young? The isolation of being a foreign actress in a city of dreams that had become a nightmare? Or were there darker forces at play, secrets buried beneath that porcelain-perfect facade that even her closest confidants never glimpsed? The police report would later state suicide by hanging, but those who knew Lucy Gordon whispered of a more complex truth. Friends described a woman who had seemed excited about upcoming projects, who had been planning her birthday party with characteristic enthusiasm. Her agent spoke of scripts on her bedside table, of a career trajectory that was finally gaining the momentum she had worked so tirelessly to achieve. Yet somewhere between the public smile and private moments, something had shattered beyond repair. As news of her death rippled across continents, from the Oxford countryside where she had first dreamed of stardom to the Hollywood hills where she had chased those dreams, one question haunted everyone who had known her. What if the beautiful mask she wore for the world had hidden a pain too profound for even her acting talents to express? But to understand how such a promising life could end in such tragic circumstances, we must first understand how it all began. In the quiet academic halls of Oxford, where a young girl named Lucy Catherine Gordon first discovered that she could become anyone she wanted to be, except perhaps herself. Lucy Catherine Gordon drew her first breath on May 22, 1980, in the scholarly embrace of Oxford, England, a city where ancient spires pierce the sky like fingers reaching toward heaven, and the weight of centuries presses down upon every cobblestone. Born to Richard Gordon, a respectable businessman whose pragmatic nature would clash with his daughter's artistic dreams. And Sue, a mother whose own unfulfilled creative aspirations would later manifest as both encouragement and unconscious pressure upon her beautiful child. Lucy entered a world that seemed to promise intellectual rigor over emotional expression. The Gordon household was one of quiet respectability, where dinner conversations revolved around practical matters rather than flights of fancy. Yet even as a child, Lucy possessed an otherworldly quality that set her apart from her peers. Teachers at her local primary school would later recall a girl who seemed to float rather than walk, who could slip into different personas during school plays with such natural ease that it was almost unsettling. Was this early gift for transformation a blessing or a curse that would eventually consume her? At age 7, Lucy discovered the local drama club, and it was there that something fundamental shifted within her. While other children played house or pretended to be princesses, Lucy created entire worlds, complete with accents, backstories, and emotional depths that seemed far beyond her years. Her drama teacher, Mrs. Henderson, would later tell reporters that Lucy had an almost eerie ability to disappear into a character, adding with visible emotion, "It was as if she was searching for someone to be, someone who might fit better in this world than Lucy herself." The contrast between Lucy's home life and her theatrical escapism grew more pronounced as she entered her teenage years. Richard Gordon, concerned about his daughter's impractical dreams, pushed her toward more traditional academic pursuits. He enrolled her in additional mathematics and science courses, hoping to steer her toward a sensible career in medicine or law. But Lucy's heart had already been claimed by the stage, and every attempt to redirect her passion only seemed to drive her deeper into the refuge of performance. Could these early tensions between duty and desire have planted the seeds of the internal conflict that would later consume her? Friends from her school years describe a girl who was breathtakingly beautiful but seemed almost uncomfortable with her own appearance, as if she viewed her reflection as just another role to play rather than her authentic self. At 15, Lucy's striking beauty caught the attention of a modeling scout during a school trip to London. The opportunity seemed like a gateway to the entertainment world she craved, but it also introduced her to an industry that would prove both nurturing and devastating. Her first professional photo shoot revealed a natural ease in front of the camera that belied her young age, yet those who worked with her noticed something peculiar. Lucy seemed more confident when she was pretending to be someone else than when asked to simply be herself. The modeling contracts that followed provided Lucy with her first taste of professional validation. But they also exposed her to the brutal realities of an industry obsessed with physical perfection. She learned to smile on command, to project confidence she didn't feel, and to navigate the delicate balance between vulnerability and strength that the camera demanded. These early lessons in performance would serve her well in her acting career, but at what psychological cost? By her late teens, Lucy had made a decision that would define the rest of her tragically short life. She would pursue acting with the same single-minded determination that had driven her childhood theatrical performances. But as she prepared to leave the familiar confines of Oxford for the unpredictable world of professional entertainment, could anyone have predicted that this journey toward stardom would ultimately become a path toward self-destruction? The rejection letters arrived like autumn leaves, constant, inevitable, and bearing the chill of disappointment. In the late 1990s, as Lucy Gordon emerged from her teenage modeling career with dreams of serious acting, the British film industry seemed to view her as little more than a pretty face-seeking, easy fame. Casting directors would glance at her striking blonde hair and piercing blue eyes, then dismiss her before she could demonstrate the depth that lay beneath that porcelain beauty. The irony was crushing. The very appearance that had opened doors in modeling was now slamming them shut in acting. Lucy's first London bedsit was a cramped, mold-stained affair in a dodgy part of Camden, shared with 3 other aspiring actresses who competed for auditions during the day and offered mutual comfort during the long nights of uncertainty. The walls were thin enough to hear her flatmates' whispered phone calls home, pleading for money or reassurance, and Lucy often wondered if her own desperate conversations with her parents in Oxford sounded just as pathetic to eavesdropping ears. The casting rounds were brutal exercises in systematic humiliation. Lucy would arrive at cattle call auditions alongside hundreds of other hopefuls, each clutching the same generic breakdown calling for attractive blonde, early 20s. She watched as girls who looked remarkably similar to her delivered the same monologues, performed the same cold readings, and received the same polite dismissals. The few callbacks she received invariably ended with the crushing phrase, "We're looking for someone with more experience." But Lucy possessed something that separated her from the endless parade of pretty faces, an almost frightening ability to inhabit a character so completely that she seemed to vanish entirely. During one particular audition for a small independent film, the casting director later recalled being genuinely unsettled by Lucy's transformation. She walked in as this beautiful, somewhat shy young woman, he would later tell The Guardian. But when she began the scene, it was as if Lucy Gordon had simply ceased to exist. Someone else was standing in that room. This gift, however, came with a price that few understood at the time. Friends began noticing that Lucy seemed to struggle with maintaining her own identity outside of performances. She would unconsciously adopt the speech patterns of characters she was preparing for, or slip into the emotional states of roles long after auditions had ended. Was this dedication to craft, or was Lucy using performance as an escape from a self she found increasingly difficult to inhabit? The breakthrough that would change everything came through an unexpected channel. American director James Toback, known for his complex, character-driven films, was in London scouting for fresh faces for his upcoming project, Spinning Boris. Unlike the British casting directors who saw only surface beauty, Toback recognized something darker and more interesting in Lucy's audition tape. He later described her as having the face of an angel with the soul of someone who had seen too much. When Lucy learned she had been cast in her first significant film role, she called her parents from a phone booth outside the casting office, tears streaming down her face. But even in that moment of triumph, there was something unsettling in her excitement. "I can finally be someone important," she whispered into the phone, words that would later haunt those who heard them. Was the success they achieved truly worth all the pain they endured? The filming of Spinning Boris introduced Lucy to the intoxicating world of international productions, with their larger budgets, celebrity co-stars, and the promise of genuine recognition. Yet those who worked with her during this period noticed a troubling pattern. Lucy seemed more comfortable during filming than between takes. When the cameras stopped rolling and she was expected to simply be herself, a visible anxiety would creep across her features as if she had temporarily forgotten how to exist without a script. The film's modest success led to more auditions, better agents, and increasingly prestigious projects. When the call came offering her a role in Serendipity alongside John Cusack and Kate Beckinsale, Lucy's career seemed poised for the kind of trajectory that transforms unknowns into stars. But success in Hollywood would prove to be a far more complex and dangerous drug than the struggle of her early career had ever been. The champagne tasted like starlight, or at least that's how Lucy described it to friends during the wrap party for Serendipity in 2001. She stood in the corner of a Manhattan hotel ballroom, watching John Cusack charm journalists and Kate Beckinsale posed for photographers, feeling simultaneously part of and utterly removed from the glittering spectacle around her. This was it, the Hollywood dream she had chased from that cramped Camden bedsit to the sound stages of major studio productions. Yet as she lifted the glass to her lips, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was still playing a role, still pretending to be someone who belonged in this rarefied world. The success of Serendipity catapulted Lucy into a tier of recognition she had never experienced. Her phone, once silent for days between auditions, now rang constantly with offers from agents, producers, and directors who suddenly saw her as more than just another pretty British export. Magazine photographers wanted to capture her ethereal beauty for fashion spreads, while talk show producers courted her for appearances that would help sell the romantic comedy to international audiences. But behind the velvet ropes and first-class flights, a more complex story was unfolding. Lucy's co-workers during this period painted a picture of an actress who seemed almost bewildered by her own success. On set, she was professional and prepared, delivering performances with the same haunting authenticity that had caught James Toback's attention. However, between takes, she would often disappear into her trailer for long periods, emerging looking slightly disoriented, as if she had been trying to remember who she was supposed to be when the cameras weren't rolling. The transition from struggling actress to Hollywood commodity brought pressures that Lucy had never anticipated. Studio executives now had opinions about her appearance, her accent, even her choice of projects. A team of handlers materialized around her. Publicists who crafted her image, stylists who dictated her look, agents who made career decisions with dollar signs rather than artistic merit in mind. The girl who had once transformed herself voluntarily for roles now found herself being transformed by an industry machine that saw her as a product to be optimized and marketed. Lucy's role in Spider-Man 3 should have been the culmination of every dream she had harbored since those childhood drama club performances. Playing reporter Jennifer Dugan in one of the most anticipated blockbusters of the decade meant exposure to millions of viewers worldwide and a paycheck that dwarfed her previous earnings. Yet friends noticed that as the film's release approached, Lucy seemed increasingly detached from the excitement surrounding the project. She would joke about being the girl who got to interview Spider-Man, recalled a friend from this period. But there was something hollow in her laughter. It was as if she was watching her own success from the outside, like it was happening to someone else. The red carpet premieres and photo shoots that should have represented the peak of achievement instead became elaborate performances where Lucy played the role of a successful actress, complete with practiced smiles and rehearsed answers to predictable questions. Behind all that glamour was there an unbearable loneliness that nobody saw. The penthouse apartment Lucy rented in Los Angeles was decorated by a professional, filled with expensive furniture and art that reflected good taste rather than personal connection. Visitors described it as beautiful but sterile, like a high-end hotel suite rather than a home. Lucy herself seemed to rattle around in the space as if she were a guest in her own life. The parties she attended were populated by people who knew her face from movie screens but understood nothing of the person behind it. Conversations revolved around projects, box office numbers, and industry gossip, leaving little room for the kind of genuine human connection that might have anchored her to reality. Lucy began to describe feeling like she was acting being famous rather than simply living as a successful actress. As her bank account grew and her recognition spread, Lucy started collecting roles like beautiful masks, each one offering temporary refuge from the increasingly uncomfortable reality of being herself. But with each performance, each transformation into someone else, the line between Lucy Gordon, the actress, and Lucy Gordon, the person, became more blurred. The very talent that had elevated her to fame was slowly erasing the woman who possessed it. The irony was perhaps most visible during interviews where journalists would ask about her overnight success and her dreams coming true. Lucy would smile and deliver the expected responses about gratitude and hard work. But those who knew her well could see the exhaustion behind her eyes. She was giving the performance of a lifetime, pretending to be happy about living the life she had always wanted. The telegram arrived on a Tuesday morning in 2007, delivered to Lucy's Los Angeles apartment while she was having coffee and reviewing scripts on her minimalist glass dining table. The message was simple and devastating. Project delayed indefinitely. Funding issues. Will contact when resolved. Just like that, her starring role in what was to be her breakthrough independent film, a complex character study that would have showcased her dramatic range beyond the commercial projects that had defined her career, vanished into the bureaucratic maze of Hollywood financing. Lucy stared at the telegram for what felt like hours, the coffee growing cold in her hands as the reality of her situation crystallized with brutal clarity. Despite years of steady work and growing recognition, she remained trapped in what she had begun to think of as beautiful accessory roles: the girlfriend, the reporter, the love interest who moved the male protagonist's story forward but had no compelling narrative of her own. Each project promised to be different. Each director assured her that this would be the role that revealed her true capabilities, yet the patterns remained depressingly consistent. The aftermath of this disappointment triggered something profound and troubling in Lucy's psyche. Friends noticed that she began to speak differently about her career, referring to herself in the third person during conversations about future projects. "Lucy Gordon would be perfect for that," she would say, as if discussing a stranger whose face she happened to wear. This linguistic distancing revealed a psychological split that was becoming increasingly pronounced. The woman was disappearing behind the actress, and the actress was becoming a hollow vessel for other people's creative visions. The scandal that would define this period of Lucy's life erupted not from her own actions, but from her association with a project that imploded spectacularly. The independent film that had been canceled was later revealed to be a front for financial irregularities, with the producer facing criminal charges for embezzling investor funds. Lucy found herself named in tabloid articles as one of the victims of the scheme, her photograph appearing alongside sensationalized headlines about Hollywood corruption and naive actors being exploited by predatory producers. The humiliation of being portrayed as a victim when she had worked so hard to be seen as a serious professional proved almost unbearable. Lucy had survived the rejection and struggle of her early career by maintaining faith in her talent and determination. Now, at the supposed peak of her success, she found herself reduced to a cautionary tale about the dark side of the entertainment industry. The very visibility she had craved was being turned against her, transforming her from actress to tabloid footnote. Media outlets that had once courted her for interviews now wanted her for entirely different reasons. Entertainment journalists called requesting comments about the scandal, their voices taking on the predatory tone that Lucy had learned to recognize and fear. Photographers began appearing outside her apartment building, hoping to capture images of her distress that could be sold alongside speculative articles about her fall from grace. The privacy she had once taken for granted became a luxury she could no longer afford. Did this tragic event mark her downfall? Or was it simply the tipping point of deeper problems? Those closest to Lucy would later point to this period as when something fundamental shifted in her relationship with fame and success. The protective shell she had built around her private self began to crack, revealing the profound loneliness and identity confusion that had been festering beneath the surface of her public persona. The psychological impact of the scandal was compounded by the realization that her professional relationships were far more fragile than she had understood. Agents who had once returned her calls immediately now took days to respond, if they responded at all. Directors who had spoken enthusiastically about future collaborations suddenly had scheduling conflicts that prevented meetings. The support network she thought she had built was revealed to be largely transactional, dependent on her value as a commodity rather than any genuine personal connection. Lucy began to exhibit behaviors that worried her few remaining close friends. She would spend days locked in her apartment, refusing phone calls and canceling professional appointments. When she did venture out, she seemed to be constantly performing, not for cameras or audiences, but as a defense mechanism against a world that felt increasingly hostile and unpredictable. Every public appearance became an elaborate act of pretending that she was unaffected by the collapse of her carefully constructed career trajectory. The financial implications of the scandal extended beyond the lost film role. Other projects that had been in development quietly disappeared from producers' schedules, and Lucy found herself facing the terrifying prospect of professional exile, just as she had begun to achieve the recognition she had worked so hard to earn. The apartment that had once felt like a symbol of her success now seemed like an expensive prison, its sterile beauty reflecting the emptiness that was consuming her from within. In the quiet hours of sleepless nights, Lucy began to question everything about the path that had led her to this point. The dreams that had sustained her through years of rejection and struggle now felt like cruel jokes, and the talent that had once been her greatest asset seemed like a curse that condemned her to a life of pretending to be other people because being herself had become impossible to bear. The prescription bottle arrived with Lucy's name printed in neat pharmaceutical font, containing 30 small white pills that promised relief from the anxiety that had become her constant companion. Dr. Elizabeth Hartman, a Beverly Hills psychiatrist who specialized in treating entertainment industry professionals, had diagnosed Lucy with adjustment disorder with mixed anxiety and depressed mood, clinical terminology for what felt like the complete dissolution of her sense of self. The sessions in Dr. Hartman's Wilshire Boulevard office became Lucy's only sanctuary from the elaborate performance that her daily life had become. Sitting in the cream-colored leather chair across from the doctor's knowing gaze, Lucy found herself able to speak honestly for the first time in years about the exhaustion of constantly being someone else. "I wake up each morning and have to decide who Lucy Gordon is supposed to be that day," she confessed during one particularly difficult session. "I've played so many characters that I've forgotten which one is actually me." The medication helped blunt the sharp edges of her panic attacks, but it also created a strange emotional numbness that made performing even more challenging. Lucy found herself struggling to access the deep wells of feeling that had always fueled her most convincing performances. Directors began commenting on a certain flatness in her work, a lack of the electric vulnerability that had once set her apart from other actresses of similar beauty and training. The very treatment that was supposed to heal her was threatening to destroy the one thing she had left: her ability to disappear into other people's lives. During this period of psychological reconstruction, Lucy made a decision that surprised everyone who knew her. She temporarily retreated from Los Angeles and rented a small cottage in the English countryside, just 20 miles from the Oxford home where her journey had begun. The cottage, with its low-beamed ceilings and garden overgrown with wildflowers, provided a sharp contrast to the sterile luxury of her Hollywood life. For the first time in years, Lucy found herself living in a space that felt human-scaled rather than designed for public consumption. The solitude of the countryside allowed Lucy to experiment with simply existing without performing. She would spend hours walking through fields and woodland paths, observing the way light changed throughout the day and how the seasons marked time in ways that had nothing to do with filming schedules or award ceremonies. These walks became a form of meditation, gradually reconnecting her with sensations and experiences that belonged to Lucy Gordon, rather than to any character she might be asked to portray. But even in this peaceful refuge, the entertainment industry continued to exert its gravitational pull. Scripts arrived by messenger from London agents, each one promising the perfect role that would restart her stalled career. Lucy found herself caught between the genuine peace she was discovering in solitude and the fear that stepping away from the industry meant losing everything she had worked to achieve. The cottage that had initially felt like salvation began to feel like a beautiful prison, cutting her off from the only professional identity she had ever known. Can anyone ever truly escape from the shadow of their darkest moments? This question haunted Lucy during the long winter evenings when the cottage felt less like a retreat and more like an exile. The silence that had initially been healing became oppressive, filled with memories of performances she had given and roles she had lost. The woman who had once complained about the constant noise of Hollywood now found herself desperately missing the chaos that had at least provided distraction from her internal struggles. Phone calls from friends and colleagues became increasingly strained as they tried to understand Lucy's withdrawal from the industry that had defined her adult life. Some expressed concern for her mental health, while others seemed frustrated by what they perceived as self-indulgent behavior. The gap between her public image as a successful actress and her private reality as a woman struggling with fundamental questions of identity became increasingly difficult to bridge during these conversations. Lucy began writing during her countryside retreat. Not scripts or treatments, but journals that attempted to capture the strange experience of having lived multiple lives while never quite inhabiting her own. These writings, which would later be discovered among her possessions, revealed a mind wrestling with philosophical questions about authenticity and performance that went far beyond typical celebrity introspection. "I think I became an actress because I was afraid of being Lucy," she wrote in one particularly revealing entry. "But now I'm afraid that Lucy never really existed at all." The decision to return to professional life came not from a sense of healing or resolution, but from financial necessity and the growing fear that complete withdrawal would mean professional death. Lucy's savings, while substantial, were being depleted by medical bills and the expensive lifestyle she had maintained even in retreat. The cottage lease was set to expire, and the choice between returning to Los Angeles or facing complete obscurity had been made for her by practical considerations rather than psychological readiness. As she packed her belongings for the return to Hollywood, Lucy discovered something troubling. The peace she thought she had found in the countryside felt fragile and artificial, as if she had simply been playing another role. This time, the role of a woman who was healing. The very authenticity she had sought seemed to slip away the moment she tried to grasp it, leaving her with the terrifying suspicion that perhaps there was no authentic self to recover, only an endless series of performances with no real performer behind them. The phone call that would change everything came on a gray February morning in 2008, the kind of London day where the sky seems to press down upon the city like a heavy gray blanket. Lucy was in her temporary Notting Hill flat, still uncertain about her next move after the countryside retreat, when her agent's excited voice crackled through the receiver with news that seemed too extraordinary to be real. French director Joanne Sfar wanted her to audition for the role of Jane Birkin in his biographical film about the legendary singer-songwriter Serge Gainsbourg. The irony was not lost on Lucy that she was being asked to portray another woman who had struggled with the burden of being beautiful in an industry that often valued appearance over substance. Jane Birkin, the English actress and singer who had become a French icon, represented everything Lucy both aspired to and feared about a life lived in the public eye. Birkin had managed to transform her ethereal beauty into artistic credibility, but she had also paid a price in personal turmoil and public scrutiny that resonated deeply with Lucy's own experiences. Preparing for the audition required Lucy to immerse herself not just in Birkin's performances, but in the complex psychology of a woman who had made her career by allowing others to project their fantasies onto her image. The parallels between their lives were unsettling. Both English roses who had found fame in foreign lands, both women whose beauty had been both blessing and curse. Both artists struggling to maintain authentic identity within the machinery of celebrity culture. When Lucy walked into the Paris casting office for her screen test, something magical and terrifying occurred. As she began to speak Birkin's words and embody her characteristic gestures, witnesses later reported that Lucy seemed to disappear entirely. Director Joanne Sfar would later describe the experience as watching one ghost channel another, adding that Lucy's portrayal was so complete that he momentarily forgot he was watching an audition rather than archival footage of Birkin herself. The role in Gainsbourg Vie héroïque offered Lucy everything she had been seeking throughout her career. A chance to demonstrate her dramatic range, an opportunity to work with respected European filmmakers, and the prospect of critical recognition that might finally establish her as a serious actress rather than a beautiful ornament. Yet from the moment she was cast, friends noticed something troubling in her enthusiasm for the project. Lucy spoke about playing Birkin with an intensity that bordered on obsession, as if she was preparing not for a performance but for a complete transformation of identity. Moving to Paris for the extended filming schedule, Lucy rented an apartment in the Marais district, choosing a space that bore an uncanny resemblance to the bohemian dwellings where Birkin had lived during her relationship with Gainsbourg. The furnished flat on Rue de Turenne, with its exposed beams and artist's studio atmosphere, seemed to cast a spell over Lucy that extended far beyond professional preparation. She began adopting Birkin's mannerisms in daily life, speaking with a slight French accent even when not filming, and developing an almost supernatural knowledge of Birkin's personal history that went far beyond what was required for the role. The filming process itself was both Lucy's greatest triumph and her most dangerous psychological experiment. Director Sfar encouraged his actors to method approaches that blurred the lines between performance and reality, and Lucy embraced this directive with a commitment that worried even seasoned professionals on the set. She would arrive each morning having spent hours studying photographs and footage of Birkin, and she would remain partially in character between takes, as if breaking the spell might cost her the ability to summon it again. Were these final decisions acts of surrender, or courageous acts of self-preservation? Those who worked with Lucy during the production of Gainsbourg noticed that her performance seemed to cost her something essential with each scene she filmed. The vulnerability and pain she brought to Birkin's most difficult moments felt too real, too raw, as if Lucy was channeling not just the character's emotions but her own deepest fears and disappointments. The romantic subplot of the film, depicting Birkin's tumultuous relationship with Gainsbourg, required Lucy to portray a love affair that was both passionate and destructive, beautiful and damaging. Those scenes seemed to unlock something in Lucy that had been carefully contained throughout her career, a willingness to expose her emotional core that was both liberating and terrifying. Cast and crew members reported that Lucy would sometimes continue crying long after "cut" was called, as if the grief she had accessed for the performance had become real and uncontrollable. As the filming neared completion, Lucy's identification with Birkin had become so complete that she began speaking about the character in disturbing ways. "Jane understands things about love and loss that I'm only beginning to learn," she told a journalist during a set visit, her words carrying an ominous weight that would only become clear in retrospect. The woman who had once struggled to find her authentic self had become so thoroughly absorbed in another's identity that the boundaries between actress and role had essentially dissolved. The wrap party for Gainsbourg was held in a small bistro near the Pont Neuf, with cast and crew celebrating what they knew would be regarded as a significant artistic achievement. Lucy attended, but colleagues noticed that she seemed disoriented by the festive atmosphere, as if the end of filming had left her without a roadmap for how to return to being herself. When asked about her plans for the future, she gave vague answers about finding new ways to disappear, words that would haunt everyone who heard them in the months to come. The morning of May 20th, 2009 began like any other in Lucy's Rue de Turenne apartment, with sunlight streaming through the tall windows and the sounds of Parisian street life filtering up from below. But somewhere between dawn and discovery, the 28-year-old actress who had spent her career disappearing into other people's lives made her final, most complete transformation. This time, into silence. Lucy's French boyfriend, Jérôme, found her body when he returned from an overnight business trip to Lyon. The scene that greeted him was both heartbreaking and surreal. Lucy hung from a silk scarf attached to the exposed beam that had been one of the apartment's most charming architectural features. She was dressed in a simple white nightgown, her blonde hair arranged as if she had prepared carefully for this final performance. On the antique writing desk, 2 letters waited in her precise handwriting, one addressed to her parents in Oxford, the other to Jérôme himself. The content of those letters, while never fully disclosed to the public, painted a portrait of a woman who had reached the end of her ability to distinguish between performance and reality. Friends who were permitted to read portions described writings that were lucid and articulate, expressing love and gratitude while also revealing a profound exhaustion with the effort required to maintain any consistent sense of self. "I have lived so many lives," she reportedly wrote, "but I have never learned how to live my own." The timing of Lucy's death was particularly cruel, coming just 2 days before her 29th birthday and mere months before Gainsbourg héroïque was set to premiere at the Cannes Film Festival. The film that should have represented her artistic apotheosis instead became her posthumous monument, with her haunting portrayal of Jane Birkin taking on an almost unbearable poignancy in light of her death. Critics who saw the finished film described her performance as prophetic and eerily prescient, as if she had somehow channeled not just Birkin's spirit but her own impending fate. The immediate aftermath of Lucy's death sent shockwaves through both the British and French entertainment industries. Jane Birkin herself, the woman Lucy had portrayed with such devastating authenticity, released a statement expressing profound sadness and noting the terrible irony that Lucy had died, just as she was about to receive the recognition she had sought throughout her career. Director Joanne Sfar described feeling haunted by the possibility that our film had somehow contributed to Lucy's psychological dissolution, a guilt that would influence his subsequent artistic choices. In the weeks following the discovery of her body, investigators worked to piece together Lucy's final days, searching for clues that might explain why a woman on the verge of critical breakthrough would choose such a definitive ending. Friends reported that she had seemed excited about the upcoming Cannes premiere and had been discussing potential future projects. Her agent confirmed that several scripts were under consideration, and there was talk of a possible American film that would have paired her with established stars who had specifically requested to work with her. Yet beneath this surface optimism, a more troubling pattern emerged. Lucy's housekeeper reported finding dozens of discarded drafts of letters scattered throughout the apartment in the weeks before her death, as if she had been trying repeatedly to find words for something that defied expression. Neighbors mentioned hearing her practicing lines at all hours, though no one could determine what role she was preparing for. The distinction between rehearsal and reality had apparently collapsed entirely in her final weeks. Was their death as straightforward as reported, or were powerful hidden forces involved? While the official investigation concluded that Lucy had died by suicide, questions lingered about the psychological pressures that had driven such a talented young woman to such an extreme decision. Some pointed to the notorious cruelty of the entertainment industry, which had repeatedly reduced her to her physical appearance while ignoring her artistic capabilities. Others noted the particular dangers faced by method actors who lose themselves too completely in their roles, citing similar tragedies throughout film history. The prescription medications found in Lucy's apartment revealed the extent of her struggle with anxiety and depression, conditions that had worsened significantly during the filming of Gainsbourg. Friends later admitted that they had been concerned about her increasing reliance on pharmaceutical assistance to manage the emotional intensity required for her performances, but they had assumed that professional success would eventually alleviate her psychological distress rather than intensify it. Perhaps the most haunting aspect of Lucy's death was the discovery that she had been researching the lives and deaths of other actresses who had struggled with similar identity issues. Her computer browser history revealed extensive reading about actresses like Jane Birkin, who had also died young after struggling with the intersection of political pressures and personal demons, and Marilyn Monroe, whose death remained shrouded in similar questions about the relationship between public image and private despair. The funeral service held at St. Margaret's Church in Oxford was attended by hundreds of mourners who represented every phase of Lucy's brief but remarkable life. Her parents, aged beyond their years by the shock of their daughter's death, struggled to reconcile the radiant child they remembered with the troubled young woman whose final letters had revealed depths of pain they had never suspected. Fellow actors spoke of her talent and dedication, while directors praised her fearless commitment to artistic truth. But underlying all these tributes was a collective sense of failure, a recognition that the very industry that had celebrated her gifts had somehow failed to protect the person who possessed them. The release of Gainsbourg v. Héroïque, several months after Lucy's death, transformed what should have been a celebration of artistic achievement into a meditation on the price of creative authenticity. Audiences watching her final performance were witnessing not just an actress at the height of her powers, but a woman in the process of dissolving the last barriers between herself and her art. The beauty and tragedy of her portrayal of Jane Birkin became inseparable from the beauty and tragedy of her own story, creating a work of art that transcended entertainment to become something approaching prophecy. In the years since Lucy Gordon's death, her story has become a cautionary tale about the psychological dangers faced by performers who stake their identity on their ability to become other people. Yet it has also served as a testament to the power of art to reveal truths that ordinary life conspires to hide. Her brief career, spanning less than a decade, produced a body of work that continues to influence young actors who recognize in her performances the same fearless vulnerability that ultimately consumed her. The apartment on Rue de Turenne where Lucy Gordon spent her final months has since been rented to other tenants, but neighbors sometimes report hearing what sounds like someone practicing lines in the early morning hours. Though no one has ever been able to determine the source of these phantom rehearsals. Whether these accounts represent genuine supernatural phenomena or simply the power of a tragic story to haunt the imagination, they serve as a reminder that some performances continue long after the final curtain has fallen. What hidden secrets might still remain untold behind her public image? As we remember Lucy Gordon, we are left not with answers but with questions that strike at the heart of what it means to be both an artist and a human being in a world that often demands we choose between authenticity and success. Her legacy remains not in the roles she played or the recognition she received, but in the reminder that behind every performance lies a person whose inner life remains as mysterious and complex as any character ever written, and sometimes far more fragile. She performed to exist, and was finally consumed by performance itself. Lucy Gordon became everyone she needed to be except the one person she was born to be. 2 days before her 29th birthday, she wrote her final script, one with no dialogue, no stage directions, only an ending that nobody saw coming. In a city of mirrors and reflections, the woman who could disappear into anyone had finally succeeded in becoming no one at all. The morning light that streams through Parisian windows today falls upon a city that has largely forgotten Lucy Gordon's name. But the questions her life and death raised about the cost of artistic transformation continue to resonate. In an industry that has only grown more demanding since her passing, her story serves as both warning and tribute, a reminder that the most powerful performances often come from those who risk everything, including themselves, in pursuit of a truth that can only be found by disappearing completely into someone else's life.